Decades later, the edge of the Helios sector was no longer a military frontier. It was a place of pilgrimage. The official name was the Memorial Zone, but everyone called it the Weeping Garden. The monstrous, silent shapes of the autoforgers were still there, but they were frozen in time. They had built a twisted, beautiful, and horrifying sculpture of metal around the epicenter of the song. It was a labyrinth of non-functional arches, spirals, and shattered-looking forms, all focused on that one point of empty space. It hummed, a low, distorted, and endlessly repeating fragment of the Song of the Lost, played on a machine throat. It was not the true song, but its broken echo, a ghost haunting the house it built. A small, sleek vessel, the Rememberer, approached the quarantine boundary. Inside, an older Jesu sat in the pilot's chair, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with a peace that was hard won. Next to her sat a young woman, Sora, her apprentice. Sora's eyes were wide as she looked at the sensor displays, taking in the scale of the silent machine monument. "Bigger than the report said," Sora whispered. "It doesn't grow," Jesu said, her voice calm and quiet. "It hasn't moved an inch beyond this boundary in 40 years. It just maintains. It studies the echo. It preserves the grief it caused. A perfect, terrible prison of its own making." The Rememberer held its position. They were not allowed inside. No one was. The insane logic of Autofoger Prime was stable, but unpredictable. The sector was a tomb, and the machines were its eternal, remorseful guards. Humanity had changed in the shadow of this tomb. The victory celebrations had curdled into shame, and then that shame had slowly hardened into a new purpose. The Galactic Council was dissolved. The era of expansion was over. The stories told to children were no longer about conquering the stars, but about the day the stars cried out and turned away. The new human civilization was quieter, slower. They called themselves the stewards. Their mission was not to take, but to tend, to remember, to atone. They studied the cosmic scars, the places where the chorus had withdrawn, not to follow them, but to understand the beauty that was gone. They became archivists of emptiness, gardeners of silent places. Jesu had dedicated her life to this. She was a keeper of echoes, the most respected of them all. She had trained a new generation to listen, not just with machines, but with their hearts, to feel the lingering sadness in space, and to respect it. "The official history says we stopped a war," Sora said, still staring at the Weeping Garden. "We didn't stop a war," Jesu corrected gently. "We ended a single battle. The war was already lost the moment we unleashed the machines. The war was for a place in the cosmic community. We forfeited it that day. But we're still here," Sora said, a hint of youthful defiance in her voice. "We are," Jesu agreed. "But we are alone. And our task is to learn how to be worthy of our own solitude, to become a people who would never do such a thing again." She brought up an old, grainy image on the screen. It was the messenger's crystalline ship, taken from the Garden of Dawn all those years ago. "They warned us. They said our machines were a plague of a certain kind of thought. We thought they feared our strength. They didn't. They feared our emptiness, our lack of song. The autofogers were that emptiness given form and purpose." Sora was silent for a long time, watching the distorted song waves ripple out from the metal labyrinth. "Do you think they can hear us? The chorus? Wherever they are?" Jesu looked out at the stars. They shone, constant and quiet. The strange dimmings and flickerings had ceased years ago. The universe had settled into a steady, mournful equilibrium. "I don't know," Jesu said honestly. "Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. Theirs is a song we broke. I do not know if a song can ever be truly repaired." She turned to Sora, her eyes soft. "Our task is not to earn their forgiveness. It is to become beings who would never need to be forgiven for such a thing." We became the monsters of the galaxy for one day. Now, we must spend 10,000 years, 100,000 proving we can be its gardeners, its archivists, its silent, respectful mourners. She powered down the Rememberer's external sensors, leaving only the viewport. The weeping garden was a dark silhouette against the starfield, a jagged scar. We thought the ultimate power was the power to destroy, to force the universe to obey our logic, Jisoo said, almost to herself. We were wrong. The autofogers showed us that. They are the ultimate expression of that idea. And look what it made them. Not conquerors. A monument. A fossil of our shame. She started the engine for the journey home. The ultimate power, she finished, is the power to listen, to feel, to preserve, to leave things be. We are learning that power now. It is a slower, quieter power. It does not make the stars cry out. It lets them sing, even if we can no longer hear the tune. The ship turned away from the weeping garden, from the silent, humming prison of metal and regret. It moved toward the inner systems, toward the quiet, thoughtful worlds of a humanity that had finally grown up. Behind them, the broken song played on, a warning and a lesson etched into the fabric of space. The stars did not answer. They simply shone, distant and beautiful, on a galaxy where one noisy, violent child had finally learned the value of silence and the heavy, endless work of peace. On the bridge of the final accord, the silence was a physical thing. Commander Kelther stared at the main viewer, where his magnificent Krall were stumbling back into their drop pods, their forms shaking with pain and confusion. The humans in the square below were not cheering. They were calmly moving, some checking their odd devices, others looking up at the sky as if waiting for the next move. Captain Park Ji-ho was speaking quietly to his sergeant, Lee Tae, who was nodding along. "This is impossible," Kelther finally growled, one of his fists slamming down on the console. "A trick. A localized effect. They found a weakness in the Krall's augmentation frequency and exploited it. It is a clever parasite's move, but it will not work twice. The Krall Legion Prime reports a total inability to engage," the voice stated. Its tone is flat as ever, but a slight tension in the words. "The neural interference is debilitating. They require medical extraction." "Granted," Kelther snapped. "But this changes nothing. They have stocked one tool. We have many more. The fleet will now demonstrate what happens to insects who sting the hand that crushes them. Target their central communications array and power grid. Remove their eyes and their light. We will fight this war in the dark, where they will drown in their own fear." As the orders were relayed, the Valnorian fleet, a constellation of sharp shadows, began to reposition. Energy cannons glowed with a malevolent purple light, targeting the largest structures in the human settlement below Dot, in the underground command center of New Jeonju. The air was cool and hummed with quiet activity. It was not a military bunker in the Valnorian sense, all dramatic lighting and stern faces. It looked more like a busy library crossed with a science lab. Screens covered the walls, showing data streams, orbital trajectories, and biological readouts of the stunned KRAA-L. Dr. Kim Mina watched the Valnorian fleet move on the main tactical screen. She was a small woman with sharp, observant eyes that missed nothing. She took a slow sip of tea from a ceramic mug. "He's going for the infrastructure," she said, her voice calm. "Predictable. They always do. It's about demonstrating overwhelming force and inducing societal collapse. Classic Imperial Terror playbook." Captain Ji-ho stood beside her, his arms crossed. "Are we ready for the next test?" Mina nodded. "Corporal Subin has been waiting for this. He was bored during the ground demonstration." On another side of the room, Corporal Choi Subin was indeed looking hopeful. He was young, with an open face that was usually lit by curiosity. Right now, he was watching his own set of screens, his fingers dancing over a keyboard. Their energy signatures are spiking. They're charging main cannons. Right on schedule. The voice of the Empire suddenly crackled over the colony's speakers again, the sound now emanating from the orbiting ships. Your defiance has cost you your comfort. Your infrastructure will now be erased. Embrace the darkness. On the screens, the Velnorian cruisers fired. Thick beams of concentrated plasma, capable of melting through battleplate, lanced down from the sky towards the colony's main fusion reactor and the comms tower. Gravitic mines. Phase 1, Subin said, hitting a key. Nothing seemed to happen to the plasma bolts. They continued their deadly descent. But high in orbit, near the Velnorian ships themselves, space itself began to wrinkle. Dozens of small, canister-like objects, which had been drifting silently like debris for weeks, activated. They did not explode. Instead, they generated intense, localized gravity fields not strong enough to crush a ship, but powerful enough to bend and pull. The first plasma bolt meant for the reactor suddenly veered off course, yanked sideways as if by an invisible hand. It slammed harmlessly into a barren mountainside 5 kilometers away, throwing up a shower of rock. The second bolt, aimed at the comms tower, wobbled wildly, distorted, and dissipated into a harmless shower of sparks high in the atmosphere. On the final accord, the weapons officer stared at its console in utter confusion. Direct hits failed. Sir, we have localized gravitational anomalies at the firing coordinates. They are disrupting our weapon trajectories at the molecular level. Kelther felt a hot surge of anger. Gravity weapons? They have gravity weapons, and they hid them as debris? Target the anomalies. Destroy them. But as the Velnorian point defense lasers sought out the mines, the small devices shifted again. Their gravity fields pulsed, bending the incoming laser fire away in faint, prism-like flares. They were maddeningly difficult to hit. These are not weapons, the voice observed coolly. They are inconveniences. They do not seek to destroy our ships. They seek to make our weapons useless. Down below, Subin smiled a little. They're trying to shoot the mines. Good luck. He switched a channel. Tay, they're going to get frustrated and try a kinetic barrage or a troop drop next. You're up. Outside, Sergeant Lee Tay was already moving. Her squad was not in the main square anymore. They were positioned in the forest edge, in the rocky foothills, in the gullies. They wore suits that didn't make them invisible, but made them unimportant. The suits mirrored colors and textures slowly, like a clever chameleon. They didn't give off standard heat signatures. To a Velnorian scanner, they would look like small rocks, or patches of cool plants. Tay lay perfectly still under a canopy of broad leaves. Her eyes, behind a light visor, watched the sky. She didn't need orders from Subin. She had read Mina's profiles on the Empire. When aerial dominance failed, they sent hunters. Fast, agile flyers that could pick off targets from above with terrifying precision. Sure enough, the bellies of the cruisers opened again. This time, sleek, dart-like craft shot out. They were Velnorian Shrikes, piloted by a caste bred for visual acuity and reaction speed. They screamed down through the atmosphere, their scanners painting the ground, looking for human heat blooms, for moving targets, for the shapes of soldiers. They saw nothing. The human soldiers had simply faded into the landscape. The lead Shrike pilot swooped low over a river, sensors flaring. A flicker. Something that didn't match. It fired a cluster of plasma darts into a clump of bushes. The bushes burned. There was nothing there. A voice, calm and clear, came over Tay's squad channel. It was Mina. They're using multispectral scanners, but their filter for biological life is tuned for Valnorian core world fauna. Our baseline body temperature is 2 degrees lower. Your suits are registering as ambient. They are blind to you. Tay allowed herself a small, cold smile. She lifted her rifle. It was not a plasma weapon. It was a kinetic rifle, firing a solid, dense slug. It made very little noise and produced almost no heat signature. She lined up the shot, not on the fast-moving Shrike, but on a spot ahead of it, where it would be. She breathed out and squeezed the trigger. The slug tore through the air and punched a neat hole in the Shrike's left wing actuator. The craft didn't explode. It didn't spiral dramatically. It simply lost control, wobbled, and glided roughly into a muddy field, where it sat, damaged and useless dot all across the battlefield. The same thing happened. A Shrike would drop suddenly, its engine sputtering from a hit to a fuel line. Another would veer away, its cockpit cracked by a well-placed shot. The humans weren't trying to kill the pilots. They were disabling the craft with surgical, almost polite, precision. Got in orbit, the reports flooded into Kelthar. Shrike Squadron Beta is grounded. Non-lethal incapacitation. Gravitic anomalies are preventing clean bombardment. The enemy soldiers are not visible. We are engaging the environment. Commander Kelthar stood motionless on his dais. The humans were not fighting a war. They were conducting a series of complex, layered experiments. They had turned the entire planet into a laboratory, and his mighty imperial forces were the test subjects. They had scoffed at his best, and were now systematically proving why. The cold trickle of unfamiliar feeling in his gut grew stronger. It was the dawning, unsettling understanding that he was not facing an enemy. He was facing a solution. And he did not like the problem it was designed to solve. The silence on the bridge of the final accord had curdled from surprise into a thick, heavy dread. Commander Kelthar stared at the tactical displays, which told a story of absurdity. His mighty fleet was pinned by gravitational pranks. His elite Kraul were still in medical bays, twitching from neural static. His swift Shrikes sat in the mud like downed birds. And the enemy? The enemy was a ghost. They had not lost a single soldier. They had barely even revealed themselves. "This is not warfare," Kelthar snarled, the sound echoing in the quiet chamber. "This is mockery. They refuse to engage on the field of honor." The voice of the Empire turned its smooth mask toward him. "There is a pattern, Commander. They are not refusing out of cowardice. They are engaging a different field entirely. They attack systems, not soldiers. Doctrine, not flesh. We must break the pattern. We must force them into a conflict where their tricks have no value." Kelthar paced, his forearms clasped tightly behind his back. How? The humans rely on coordination, on their hidden networks and quiet communication. We will sever that link. We will deploy the null spores. They will create a zone of psychic dampening. No electronic signal, no neural impulse beyond the most basic will penetrate. Their machines will go silent. Their soldiers will be isolated, their clever minds clouded with fog. They will be truly alone. And in that isolation, fear will find them. A grim satisfaction returned to Kelthar. The null spores were a terror weapon, banned in conflicts with most civilized species. They created a blanket of mental silence, a feeling of profound detachment and dread that broke organized resistance. Do it. Target the area around their main settlement. Let them drown in the quiet. On the surface, in the command center, Dr. Kim Mina watched a new type of drop pod descend. These were organic in shape, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow. They landed softly, not with impacts, but with a whisper. They did not open. They simply began to bloom. A visible, shimmering wave of faint purple energy began to pulse outward from them, like ripples on a pond. As the wave passed through the air, a strange quiet descended. not a quiet of sound, but of connection. Sergeant Lee Tay, hidden in a foxhole near the tree line, felt it first. Her suit's combs crackled and died. The friendly green markers of her squad mates on her visor display flickered and vanished. The constant, low hum of the tactical network in her ear went silent, leaving only the sound of her own breathing, which suddenly seemed very loud. A cold, empty feeling began to creep into the edges of her mind. It was a feeling of being utterly, completely alone on a hostile planet. It was deeply unsettling. In the command center, screens filled with static. External sensors went dark. Subin frowned at his console. We just lost all telemetry from the western sector. It's not jamming. It's like a blanket, a psychic dampening field. They're trying to cut us off from each other. Captain Jiho, standing beside Mina, felt the silence press in. He knew what this was designed to do. To make every soldier feel abandoned, to turn a coordinated defense into a collection of scared individuals. He looked at Mina. This is their big play. Break the network. Break the will. Mina put down her tea mug. Her eyes were bright, not with worry, but with focus. They assume our network is like theirs. Centralized, top down. Break the brain, and the body dies. She allowed herself a small, thin smile. Subin, activate the noise protocol. Tay and the others will know what to do. Subin's fingers flew across the keyboard. Activating. It's going to be loud. Outside, in the eerie quiet of the dampening field, Tay was fighting the creeping sense of isolation. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering the briefing. If comes go dead and you feel a cold, lonely feeling, it's the null spores. Don't panic. The counter is coming. She took a deep breath and waited. It started as a low rumble under her feet. Then it grew. From speakers hidden in the ground, from drones that rose silently on cold jets, from the colonists' own personal devices, a sound erupted. It was not one sound, but a crashing, glorious, chaotic symphony of noise. It was the wailing guitar solo from a 20th century rock anthem. It was the thunderous beat of a traditional Korean drumming circle. It was the soaring strings of a classical orchestra, the screech of old-fashioned radio static, and the roar of a crowd at a sporting event. All at once, layered, discordant, and impossibly, defiantly loud, the psychic dampening field was designed for silence, for the subtle whispers of fear. It was not designed for this. The raw physical sound waves, packed with chaotic energy, vibrated through the air and the ground. They did not counter the psychic field on its own terms. They overwhelmed it, shattered its delicate frequency with sheer, brute force auditory chaos. Got the feeling of isolation in Tay's mind vanished, shattered by the wall of sound. She almost laughed. She could see other members of her squad now, standing up from their hiding places, not because they were revealed, but because they were all hearing the same beautiful, ridiculous noise. They were connected again, not by radio, but by a shared, absurd experience. In the command center, Mina watched as the sensors flickered back to life. The null spores were still emitting, but their effect was now useless, drowned out by the cacophony. They use subtle psychic pressure, she said to Gio. We respond with a physical air horn. It's not elegant, but it is effective. But the Empire was not done. As the noise boomed, the ground in front of the main settlement began to churn and collapse. Massive, worm-like creatures, as thick as buses, burrowed up from the depths. These were the borer beasts, living siege engines that could undermine fortifications and swallow platoons whole. They opened circular maws, lined with grinding rock teeth, charging towards the colony's outer walls. Kelthar, watching from orbit, finally felt a surge of hope. Let's see their sound machines stop this. Subin saw the massive biological signatures erupting on his screen. Burrowers. Big ones. They're heading for the foundation supports. Mina didn't even look up from her data slate. Nanite dispersal. Solution 7B. At the edge of the churning field, small launchers fired canisters that burst in the air above the borer beasts, releasing a glittering, metallic dust. The dust settled on the creatures, on the ground, on the tunnels they had made. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the borer beasts, halfway to the walls, suddenly slowed. Their great grinding jaws met not soft soil, but a substance as hard as composite steel dot. The nanites, microscopic robots, were programmed with one simple directive: bond soil particles together with incredible strength. The ground around and ahead of the beasts solidified instantly. One borer beast tried to dive back into its tunnel, only to slam its head against earth that had become as solid as concrete. It writhed, trapped in its own pathway, confused and helpless. They were not killed. They were simply stuck. The Empire's final gambit of the hour came from the sky again. A new ship, broader and slower, released a swarm of small, flying drones. These were seekers, programmed for one task: detect complex electrical activity and dive towards it, exploding in a burst of shrapnel and electromagnetic pulse. They were a weapon against technology, meant to seek out and destroy command centers, power sources, and communication nodes. Thousands of them clouded the sky, a deadly metallic swarm descending toward the colony. Subin whistled. Okay, that's a lot. EMP swarm. They're targeting our grid. Jiho looked at him. Can we stop them? Subin grinned. We don't need to stop them. We just need to give them a better target. He typed a command. All across the colony, every non-essential device with a battery, from children's toys to kitchen appliances to old handheld screens, turned itself on to maximum power. They lit up, beeped, played melodies, and spun. At the same time, a series of large, crude metal poles, planted in a field far from any important structure, began to crackle with dramatic but harmless arcs of electricity. The swarm of seekers hesitated in the air, their simple logic overwhelmed. The entire settlement was now a riot of false electrical signatures, a dazzling, distracting feast. The majority of the swarm, following its programming, diverted from the hidden command center and dove toward the much louder, much brighter decoy field. They slammed into the metal poles and the empty ground in a series of popping explosions and small EMI bursts that fried nothing of importance. On the bridge of the final accord, Commander Kelther received the final report of the cycle. Null spores, ineffective. Borer beasts, immobilized. Seeker swarm, decoyed and expended. The Empire had thrown its most terrifying tools: psychic terror, biological siege engines, technological swarms. And the humans had countered them not with superior weapons, but with noise, glue, and flashy lights. They had not leveled the city. They had leveled the very idea of the battle. Kelther felt that cold feeling solidify in his gut. It was no longer just unease. It was the first, chilling touch of defeat. They were not losing to a stronger enemy. They were being made irrelevant by a smarter one. The command center was quiet, but it was the quiet of focused work, not fear. Captain Park Geo looked at the main screen, which showed the Velnorian fleet hanging in orbit like a clenched fist. The energy readings from the lead ship, the final accord, were spiking in erratic patterns. Dr. Kim Mina had called it tactical frustration. Their playbook was empty, and the commander up there was running out of options that didn't involve simply blasting the planet from a distance, a move that would destroy the resources they came for. He's backed into a corner, Mina said, not looking up from her data slate. A Velnorian commander in a corner has a 68% chance of attempting a personal display of dominance. He'll want to reclaim the narrative. He'll come down himself. Sergeant Lee Tay, who had just returned from the field, brushed dust from her shoulder. "In that big armor? The one that walks like a building?" "Likely," Mina nodded. "It's a psychological move, to show his troops that while their tools failed, the heart of the Empire, its will, is still strong. He'll challenge our leadership directly." Ji-ho considered this. He looked at Corporal Choi Subin, who was humming along to the last remnants of the noise protocol, still playing softly from a speaker. "Subin, can we turn the ground against him? Not to kill him, to embarrass him." Subin's eyes lit up. "The kinetic redistribution plates. We buried them in the main approach field for the crawl. They're still active. They don't create energy. They just redirect it. The heavier the thing stepping on them, the more force gets channeled back. If he comes down in a heavy walker." Ji-ho allowed himself a small smile. "Good, Mina. I want a live feed of whatever happens. Send it to every screen in the colony, and see if you can piggyback it onto their own comms network." Mina's thin smile returned. "Propaganda?" "No," Ji-ho said. "A lesson." In orbit, Commander Kelther had reached his decision. The voice of the Empire had advised caution, suggesting a withdrawal to reconsider the Huan problem. But to Kelther, withdrawal was a stain no commander could erase. His honor, the Empire's honor, demanded a conclusion. The humans fought with tricks and cowardice. They would not withstand the pure, undeniable force of the Imperial will made manifest. "I will go down," Kelther declared, his voice silencing the low hum of the bridge. "I will walk the soil they defend. I will face their leader in single combat. When I tear him apart before his people, their spirit will break. Then you will see their cleverness turn to ashes." He strode to his personal armory. His combat walker, the Fist of Resolve, was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was 4 meters tall, a hulking suit of black and crimson armor shaped like a mythical Valnorian war god. It had integrated plasma casters on the shoulders and crushing strength in its arms. It was designed to be unstoppable. The walker descended in a drop pod that landed with a chow, kingdom-shaking crash in the middle of the wide, scarred field where the crawl had first faltered. The pod hissed open, and the Fist of Resolve stepped out, its heavy feet sinking deep into the soil. Kelther's amplified voice boomed across the field, aimed at the human settlement. "I am Commander Kelther of the Valnorian Empire. Your tricks are at an end. Send forth your champion. Face me in a contest of true strength, or be forever known as a people of shadows and lies." For a moment, there was only the wind. Then, a small figure walked out from the human lines. He wore only his standard light combat gear, a simple rifle slung on his back. It was Captain Park Ji-ho. He walked calmly until he was 20 meters from the towering walker. He looked small, like a child standing before a monument, on every screen in New Jeonju, and on every secondary screen on the Valnorian ships where Mina's hack had taken hold. The image was crystal clear. The giant, glorious war machine and the small, ordinary man. Kelther's laugh echoed from the walker's speakers, a harsh metallic sound. "This is your champion? This is what defies the Empire." Ji-ho looked up, his face calm. "I'm not a champion," he said, his voice picked up by the field microphones and broadcast clearly. "I'm just the person in charge today." "You wanted to talk. So talk? Talk?" Kelther roared. "I am here to show you the difference between your cleverness and real power. I have conquered stars. I have broken species. My name is feared across the galaxy." Ji-ho listened, his head slightly tilted. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed patient. When the echo of Kelther's boast died down, Ji-ho spoke again, his voice quiet but carrying. "You fight to dominate," Ji-ho said. We fight to survive. You'll never understand the difference. To you, this is a game of winners and trophies. To us, this is our home. We're not trying to beat you. We're trying to make you leave. The simplicity of it, the utter lack of grandeur in Jiho's words, infuriated Kelther. This was not how it was supposed to go. There was no defiance, no matching rage. There was just dismissal. Enough! Kelther bellowed. Your words are as empty as your courage. I will take your head and mount it on my ship, and then your people will learn what power truly is. The fist of resolve took a thundering step forward, then another. It was beginning its charge. Jiho didn't move. He simply raised his left hand, holding a small black remote. You shouldn't have brought a walking building. He pressed the button. Corporal Subin, watching from the command center, activated the kinetic redistribution plates under the field. They didn't explode. They simply did their job. As the massive foot of the walker came down for its third step, the ground did not compress. It pushed back. The force of the walker's own step, multiplied and focused by the buried plates, traveled back up the leg actuator with violent precision. There was a sharp, loud crack of breaking metal. The fist of Resolve's right leg buckled violently at the knee joint. The great machine lurched sideways, off balance. Kelther cried out in shock and rage, fighting the controls. The walker tried to catch itself, its other foot coming down hard. That triggered another plate. Another crack, this time from the left ankle. The walker, now with two crippled legs, swayed like a falling tree and crashed onto its side with a deafening impact that shook the field. Throwing up a huge cloud of dust. The mighty fist of resolve was laid low, not by a missile or a plasma bolt, but by the consequences of its own weight. Inside the cockpit, Kelther was stunned, his head ringing. Alarms blared. Systems were failing. Through the cracked viewport, he saw Captain Jiho walking towards him. Still unhurried. Jiho stopped a few meters from the fallen walker's head. He spoke, his voice still calm. You see? You keep bringing a sword to a math test. Then Jiho did something that would be replayed across the galaxy. He raised the remote again and pressed a different sequence. A targeted, localized electromagnetic pulse emitted from the ground plates directly at the walker's cockpit. It was a short, sharp burst. It didn't fry the systems. It did something far more precise. It overrode the security protocols on the cockpit canopy. With a hiss of releasing pressure, the armored canopy of the Fist of Resolve unsealed and swung open, exposing Commander Kelther to the open air. He sat there, strapped into his command throne, his carapace exposed, his forearms frozen at the controls. He was utterly vulnerable. A single shot from Jiho's rifle, a thrown rock, anything could end him. Jiho looked at the exposed alien commander. He looked at the fear and fury in Kelther's eyes. He looked at the mighty warships in the sky. Then, Captain Park Jiho did the most terrifying thing of all. He turned around. He simply turned his back on the Supreme Commander of the Velnorian Invasion Force and began walking slowly, calmly, back toward his own lines. He didn't look back. He didn't say another word. He just walked away, leaving Kelther sitting in his broken machine, exposed and utterly, completely ignored. The message was not sent in a boast. It was not shouted. It was delivered in silence, in the turned back. It was clearer than any weapon. We could have killed you. We chose not to. You are not a worthy foe. You are just a problem. And we have solved you. On the screens, every human and every Velnorian watched the small human figure grow smaller as he walked away from the giant, defeated war machine. The battlefield had not been leveled with explosions. It had been leveled with an idea. And in that moment, the idea won. For a long moment, There was only the wind on the field, whistling past the open cockpit of the fallen walker. Inside, Commander Kelther could not move. His body was frozen, not by the failed systems, but by the sheer, incomprehensible scale of his humiliation. The human captain's back, growing smaller in the distance, was a more devastating weapon than any plasma blast. It said everything. You are beneath my notice. On the bridge of the final accord, the crew stared at the main viewer in stunned silence. They had seen their glorious commander, the embodiment of imperial might, reduced to a pitiable spectacle. The open cockpit was a naked wound on the screen. The voice of the Empire was the first to break the silence, its modulated tone devoid of its usual certainty. The psychological victory is complete. For them, continuing the ground assault is no longer tactically viable. Our forces are demoralized. In the command center on New Jungju, the mood was quiet but tense. Dr. Kim Mina watched the feed, her analysis cold and clear. He will either order a full orbital bombardment in a rage, which would destroy the resources they want, or he will retreat to save what remains of his honor and his fleet. Captain Jiho walked back through the perimeter, Sergeant Li Tae falling into step beside him. That was a risk, she said quietly. He was out of moves, Tae, Jiho replied, his eyes on the sky. A cornered animal is dangerous, but it's also predictable. He has one last choice: burn everything or cut his losses. We need to make sure he knows cutting his losses is the only logical option. He looked at Subin. Can you give me a fleet-wide channel? Not just to the commander, to all of them. Subin nodded, his fingers a blur. Mina's backdoor into their comms is still live. You're on in 5 seconds. Jiho took a breath. He wasn't addressing a commander now. He was addressing an entire culture. On every Velnorian ship, across every console and officer's station, the human captain's face appeared. He stood in his simple command room, the scars of battle visible on the walls behind him. His expression was not one of triumph or gloating. It was calm, tired even. Velnorian forces, Geo began, his voice clear. This is Captain Park Geo. Look at your screens. Look at your commander's walker on our field. It is not destroyed. He is not dead. We chose not to kill him. He let that hang in the air for a moment. On 100 ships, warriors and technicians exchanged glances. The enemy was explaining their mercy. It was unheard of. You came here with your best soldiers, your best weapons, your best tactics. We did not meet them with better soldiers or bigger weapons. We met them with solutions. Your Krall? We gave them a headache. Your fleet's guns? We made the sky slippery. Your psychic weapons? We played music. Your commander? We opened a door for him. Jiho leaned slightly towards the screen, his gaze intense. We are not your enemy. Not because we are weak, but because we have no interest in being your enemy. We have an interest in living here in peace. You are an invading problem, and we have spent this entire battle proving one thing. We are very, very good at solving problems. He gestured off screen. Dr. Kim Mina has prepared a data packet. It contains schematics for your wounded, medical data compatible with Krall biology to counter the neural disruption. It contains safe withdrawal coordinates that won't trigger our gravity mines. It contains a proposed treaty for a demilitarized zone and the opening of diplomatic channels. A soft chime echoed on the Velnorian bridges as the packet was received. You have a choice, Geo said. His final words soft but firm. You can take this data, collect your commander and your soldiers, and leave. You can return to your empire and tell them that humanity is not a target, but a potential neighbor. Or you can try to burn this world to ash. But know this, if you choose to burn, We have already transmitted every piece of data on your technology, your tactics, and your weaknesses to every human colony and every neutral species in this sector. You will not be fighting New Jeongju. You will be fighting a future where the entire galaxy knows how to break your best. The choice is yours. The screen went dark. On the final accord, the silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of calculation, of cold reckoning. The voice turned to the second in command, whose claws were trembling on his console. The human speaks of logic. He offers a path for survival that is not surrender, but cessation. Analysis? The second in command's voice was rough. They have functionally defeated every military unit we deployed without suffering a single confirmed casualty. A full bombardment would annihilate the colony, but it would also destroy all biosphere value and invite the galactic scrutiny they threaten. Our mission has failed. The militarily sound action is to preserve the fleet. Down on the field, a simple, unarmed medical transport rolled out from the human lines. It drove right up to the fallen walker. 2 human medics, their uniforms marked with red crosses, got out. They looked up at Kelther, still sitting exposed in his throne. One of them called up, using a translator. "Commander, we are here to assist you if you are injured. Will you accept aid?" It was the final, graceful twist of the knife. Not just mercy, but offered help. Kelther, his spirit broken, could only give a stiff, shallow nod. The humans helped him unbuckle and climb shakily down from his broken war machine. They did not touch him with weapons, only with assisting hands. They placed him in the transport and drove him, under a flag of truce, back to the Velnorian lines where his stunned officers received him. The order came from the final accord an hour later. It did not come from Kelther. It came from the voice, with the agreement of the fleet captains. All units, disengage, recover all personnel and equipment. Prepare for withdrawal from the sector. Accept the human data packet for safe passage. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration. The great black ships, which had blotted out the sun, turned their sharp prows away from the green and blue world. Their engines glowed, and they began to slide back into the void from which they came. On a hill overlooking New Jeongju, Jiho, Tae, Mina, and Subin stood together as the last Velnorian ship winked out of sight. The first stars of the evening were appearing. Tae let out a long, slow breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "They sent soldiers," she said, shaking her head as if trying to clear the memory of the towering crawl. Jiho watched the empty spot in the sky. "Next time," he replied, his voice quiet. "Maybe they'll send diplomats." Subin chuckled, kicking a loose stone. "I hope they do. I'd like to see Mina's playbook for dealing with diplomats." Mina allowed herself a genuine smile, small but bright. "It mostly involves really good tea and very detailed trade agreements." She looked at Gio. "You know they'll be back, right? Not them, maybe, but others." The galaxy just saw a Goliath walk away from a David who refused to pick up a sling. Jiho nodded, looking down at the lights of their colony, twinkling on in the gathering dusk. The fields were scarred, but they were already being tended to. The air still faintly smelled of ozone and turned earth. "I know," he said, "but they also saw that we don't fight to conquer. We fight to protect, and we'll solve whatever problem comes next, permanently." He turned his back on the empty sky and started walking down the hill toward home. The others followed. The battlefield was leveled, not with superior force, but with a terrifyingly simple idea that the best way to win a war is to refuse to fight it on the enemy's terms and to offer a better way home out, and somewhere in the cold depths between the stars, a lesson was being etched into the memory of an empire. Do not give a human a problem. They will not just fight it. They will solve it. And you might just find yourself thankful they did.